The issue of federal minimum wage has been a hotly debated economic issue. The minimum wage is a government price floor that establishes a price higher than the market price for labor. There are many arguments in favor of a minimum wage, but they all rest on the fundamental assumption that the minimum wage offers spillover benefits that offset any negative consequence from disturbing market equilibrium. Some proponents also believe that the lack of minimum wage allows for exploitive labor, which creates a negative externality. The fact that employers do not want to bear the cost of this negative externality necessitates government intervention. As seen here, employers who pay minimum wage often incur costs on the public to assist its employees. Most notably, welfare has been a government assistance program to help correct for this.
Various states have adopted their own minimum wage policies ranging from the national minimum of $7.25 to more than double that amount, $15 in Seattle. Nevertheless, different conditions across the country create various reasons for having higher or lower minimum wages. We will argue that there should be a minimum wage and weigh the pros and cons of raising that current minimum wage.
In addition to the federal minimum wages, most states have state minimum wages, which work in the same manners. Employers in that state must comply with state standards. The majority of the state minimum wages are set higher than the federal minimum wage in order to account for things like cost of living. There are, however, some states where the minimum wage is currently set lower than the federal minimum wage. This does not make much of a difference since employers in that state must abide by federal law and pay the higher federal minimum wage. These states have set lower state minimum wages to take into account what they believe the living wage should be in that state. However, the federal minimum wage protects employees in these states. In Massachusetts, the state minimum wage was just increased from $10 in 2016 to $11 in 2017.
Originally, the federal minimum wage was instituted during the Great Depression by the United States government in order to provide a living wage to workers. The minimum wage, when it was instituted in 1938, was 25 cents, which is about $4.13 today when adjusted for inflation. Clearly, the minimum wage has seen an increase over the past 80 years. Recently, there have been pushes to raise the federal minimum wage to what some describe as a living wage. However, the main idea of any type of minimum wage has always been to prevent employers from underpaying their employees, which would reduce employee access to basic necessities. In this sense, the lack of a minimum wage creates a negative externality. The market price for labor does not account for things like poor working conditions in many areas and also does not account for the increased social trouble that comes with increased poverty rates. Thus, a federal minimum wage would correct for these. A form of government intervention that supports employees. Comprehensive legislation has allowed the government to push the burden of survival onto the employers where it should belong.
Although there is a wide consensus that there should be a federal minimum wage, there are debates about whether that it should be increased, lowered, or kept the same. Many people are hesitant about raising the minimum wage, which suggests that there are drawbacks to doing so. Increasing the minimum wage increases cost to firms, which causes them to take various measures to offset these effects. First, raising the minimum wage could lead to greater outsourcing. This concern is shared by many people, especially conservatives, who believe that increasing the minimum wage would result in more jobs moving overseas, where workers are paid less than $5 an hour. If the federal minimum wage is raised, the incentive to ship jobs overseas increases even more to lower overhead costs. While outsourcing leads to unemployment, another negative effect of increasing the minimum wage is automation. A similar case arises as discussed above. Increasing the minimum wage leads firms to seek new avenues to lower some of the costs that detract from making a profit. At a certain point, many low-skilled workers will be displaced by the use of robots and other technologies which can efficiently carry out these tasks without the need to pay them at an hourly rate.
While there may be disadvantages to raising the minimum wage, there are also major advantages to doing so, each of which comparatively outweigh any possible drawback. One major advantage to raising the federal minimum wage is that it would lead to a rise in consumer spending per trickle-down economics. Since more people would be receiving more income, they would purchase more things, which increases the circulation of wealth within the economy. In addition, people who are living on or right below the poverty line with jobs that pay at the level of federal minimum wage would be lifted out of that zone, which helps to correct the negative externalities which were mentioned earlier. Not only would the number of people in poverty decrease because of a higher minimum wage, the income gap would also shrink. A higher minimum wage would also make workers more productive. Since workers would be receiving more money per unit of time, they would have a drive to work productively to keep their jobs just in case a firm needed to cut down on its supply of employees. This will also decrease employee turnover because workers will not switch jobs often, which saves business training and hiring costs. If workers are working more efficiently and businesses do not have to deal with unnecessary costs, the total revenue will increase, which shows how raising the minimum wage creates a wave of spillover benefits.
Given the pros and cons stated earlier, we think that the federal minimum wage should be raised. While the problem is debated by economists across the world who struggle to find the perfect price for a federal minimum wage, we think $10 is a good estimate for what it should be raised in order to reap some of the benefits while minimizing some of the drawbacks. This is above the current federal minimum wage set at $7.25 an hour, but lower than Seattle's $15 an hour wage. Some states like Massachusetts would be unaffected by this raise, where it would still be below the state minimum wage. However, on a national scale, it would help correct for the poor living conditions that are a result of cheap labor in many other states where minimum wage is below currently $10.
This federal minimum wage of $10 per hour would be high enough to pay workers more than enough to subsist, but isn't that high that those benefits are canceled by unemployment. This middle ground allows workers to live a better life, work productively, offset business costs with increased consumer spending, and avoid turnover costs. Demand for many service jobs is so socialized that a higher minimum wage would not lead to much outsourcing or automation. In addition, the minimum wage would not be that high that it would be profitable for many companies to automate certain jobs because that would be more expensive than paying workers at the minimum wage. Our proposal to raise the minimum wage also does not preclude certain things like taxes on companies who choose to outsource their jobs, which can further correct for some of the drawbacks and shows why, at some points, government intervention is necessary to check certain negative externalities, like the existence of cheap labor practices.
Thank you for watching.